Hello, my name is Michael Ungar, and I'm the Canada Research Chair in Child, Family and Community Resilience at Dalhousie University in Halifax, Canada. And it's a real pleasure to have Paul Baker with me today. Paul, can I just get you to introduce yourself and a little bit about what your position is?
Yeah, so my name's Paul Baker. I'm the Regional Executive Principal for the Adventure Learning Academy Trust in Cornwall, England.
And I'm just curious if you could sort of tell us a little bit about the program and some of the unique things about both the population you serve and indeed about the design of the program that you've actually, that you're offering.
Okay. So in terms of the population, the school, Gulville School, sits in a deprived, quite a deprived area, nationally as well as within Europe. The project is, it's about supporting and developing the emotional resilience of our pupils and their well-being and staff well-being as well. And it's centered around animals, use of animals and therapeutic care.
So can you give some examples of what the program actually looks like that's sort of different than your regular educational institution?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so what does it look like on the ground? So if you walked around the school, there is a paddock with two pygmy goats called Frodo and Bilbo. They're recent additions to the school in the last 8 months actually now. Further on, there's a chicken enclosure, quite a large chicken enclosure, and rabbits as well. And the latest addition from September 2017 is a dog called Whoopi. So a school dog, again, pure, in terms of building relationship and self-esteem. That's what they're for. And they've at Gulville, they've become part of what they call what we know as the school family. So they're no different to any of the pupils, parents, community. They're very much part of the community there. And
what I'm curious about is if you could just describe how are they integrated into the programming, or what is the purpose of having you're in a relatively rural, as you say, economically depressed area in the UK. Why the animals? What's the connection, or what's made this part of a school program for these children?
Well, I guess the passion lies with those staff that sit in schools. So that's where it came from originally. Huge amount of research about the benefits that animals can bring to children, to all sorts of different settings. Particularly around relationship, but also in terms of responsibility as well, which is really key for me, really clear for me. So Whoopi, the school dog, at 8:30 in the morning, there is a dog walking group that goes off. The school doesn't start till 9 o'clock, so this is an early intervention, if you like. And really, it's while it's open to everybody, actually, what we're doing is targeting pupils who, maybe persistent late, we'd call it. So if they're arriving at 9:15, 9:30, or even there might be an issue with absence that we're trying to support. So encouraging them into school earlier, and going off for a dog walk at 8:30 in the morning is a way to get them into school, get them ready for learning, make sure they've had breakfast alongside that, and get them ready for the start of their school day. So that's just one aspect of Whoopi, the school dog. Another really key is around reading, and particularly for boys as well. And I was no different when I was younger, but actually boys, it's all about confidence reading, and certainly reading out loud can be quite daunting for some children, particularly if their fluency it isn't quite there yet. The speed at which they're reading. So reading to Whoopi, sitting down in the corridor, Whoopi in a basket or on a bench somewhere is a way to promote and encourage that reading for pleasure. And Whoopi is the audience.
The kids are reading out loud to the dog.
Yeah.
Goats.
Just two examples. Yeah, the goats.
A couple of goats. And I know the chickens, but I'm curious also, how do you integrate in the other animals into the program?
Yeah. Well, the chickens. We've got chickens first. The chickens are, in a sense, I think they're the easiest in a way. They take very little looking after, in a sense. We can hand that responsibility over to groups of children. It's actually led by a child in year 6, so he takes overall responsibility for the animals, if you like. Under that child is a group of children who, on different days, are rotated in to complete, say, a health check on the chickens, make sure they're all there, make sure we haven't had a fox in and they're all still intact. To make sure their enclosure is up to the standards that we'd expect. Make sure they've got food and water, and to collect the eggs as well. So that happens daily. In terms of the learning around that, let's attach that actually that the egg production is tracked. So it is tracked very, very carefully from September all the way through the academic year. And the egg production, there's a whole load of maths that sits behind it around productivity, cost of food, what we're getting back in terms of donations for the eggs. Is it financially viable? Those questions around those real higher order questions that my year 6s are doing at the moment around, actually, if we've got 12 chickens at the moment, well, if we double that to 24 because we've got the space, does our profit double? So all sorts of that really rich learning around the animals that are in school, and it's real life, it's purpose, which is what we want. Also, factor in that as well. Actually, the children selling the eggs, albeit via a donation to the community, just in terms of communication skills and feedback. Actually, these are chickens that they're looking after. They've bred from very young. They're feeding, making sure they've got water, and they're turning a profit as well. In terms of that sense of business, is really
very interesting. And the goats?
Yeah, the goats. The one example with the goats. So the goats are similar sort of setup. Really, there's a rota every day. This is obviously weekday school days. The weekends are very, very different. I'll come on to that in a minute. So the goats are looked after again by the children with a member of staff who's kind of leading that and just making sure, double checking, making sure things are okay. So we've got an oversight. But those children are cleaning the goats out, making sure their pasture's okay. We found, they found an odd plant and didn't know what it was, did some research, and it turned out that it was poisonous for goats. So that came, that was stripped out, but that was led by the children. So they're very much in charge and responsible, and they get that feeling of responsibility. They feel like they're their goats.
Yes.
There's all that just around relationship. The pygmy goats themselves are so they're very curious, very, very good natured, but certainly curious. They will come up and investigate. They will, if a child is kneeling down on the floor, back legs will go up on the back of the child. So there's that real sense of getting to know the animals, and there really is a relationship and a bond there. They're both, in terms of curriculum as well, both animals are very, very different. They're both pygmy goats. They're two brothers, both pygmy goats, but in terms of their characters, they're polar opposites, which is why they're called Bilbo and Frodo Baggins, because they're very, very different as well in terms of adventurous and a bit more reticent. And we see that in the goats. So simple things like story writing and developing a character, suddenly you can see what we mean by that in terms of character, because we know the goats so well. They know that Frodo is very adventurous and Bilbo is a bit more reticent, but he gets his confidence through Frodo. So those sorts of things bring characterization to life as well.
I see.
The reception pupils, so our youngest children in school, the reception class, in terms of audience, had learnt a story, part of a Pye Corbett storytelling approach. So they've learnt the story. The idea behind that is that they're learning they've got access to lots of rich language that they may not ordinarily get. So they've learnt a story off by heart. Then they edit it and they tweak it and they retell it. But for an audience, it was the Billy Goat's Gruff.
Oh yes,
Billy Goat's Gruff that they learned. So they went out into the paddock, and the goats literally have a bridge, and it's a bridge that the goats cross, and the children were able to stand next to the bridge, retell their story to the goats, and the goats were wandering past them, and just that real, just that real sense of audience, real sense of purpose, and very, very different. Just not often we get a story to a goat.
In those examples, what I'm hearing about is so many of the things that we think about when we think about facilitating resilience, about creating opportunities for
Yeah.
relationships and meaning.
Yeah.
Really, giving kids access to genuine experiences. If you're talking about school engagement as a
Yeah.
facilitator of resilience, you're talking about making school, well, relevant is the word you use, Paul, or
Yeah.
getting kids in there because they have a responsibility in the
Yeah.
morning that they actually have to do. Plus, of course, using these elements, which I almost get a very clear sense are culturally and contextually relevant. I mean, you're in a relatively
Yeah.
rural
Rural setting. Yeah.
and therefore these are things, these are skill sets, this is things that are sort of relevant to the children
Yeah.
there, rather than trying to, I get the sense, forcing the children to become urbanites or some
Yeah.
sort of different identity.
Yeah.
So that's great I mean, do you sort of see the program as creating more resilience or more capacity to be resilient amongst these children? Has that ever come up as a conversation?
Yeah, I think it's one aspect of a program around resilience. I think it's one part of it, and I think it fits in really well. Certainly around responsibility, and we're really clear that responsibility means responsibility. So when one of my, I think I alluded to at the conference actually, that you walk around a corner and there are year 5, 6, some of our older children in with younger children, and they're literally cleaning out the goats. They've got the wheelbarrow, they've got the spades, the forks, but there isn't a member of staff in sight. Not everything is micromanaged. They genuinely have the responsibility of doing that, and I think that in its sense. It's certainly a purpose. That's certainly about feeling valued. And that sense of belonging, and that for me is absolutely key and absolutely clear. The other thing around resilience is that when I arrived at the school, when I first started out, the school was in a category. It's called special measures. So you're familiar with Ofsted, of course. So it was in a challenging situation, shall we say, in terms of its journey and its school improvement journey. And a lot of what I've seen is that capacity for both staff and pupils to kind of cope with mistakes, learn from mistakes, just wasn't there at all. It was, probably a legacy of coming through a challenging time. So we had to build that back in. We did a lot of work on Carol Dweck and growth mindset. So that became, which is great, but unless it's been led from the very top, and you're driving that, and you're living and breathing that, and it becomes the culture. For me, that doesn't work. But that's what we got. So we became a school with a culture that was a growth mindset culture and ethos, and then we started to get a bit of momentum. So into assemblies as well, we talked around making mistakes and why actually we're going to celebrate those, because now I know you're going to get to a point where you're going to learn. It's actually really exciting when you're stuck. So all those sorts of things were coming in anyway, around resilience, emotional resilience, and resilience around learning. And we got to a point where actually we were in a much stronger place in terms of behaviour, and then we could add in terms of extended curriculum opportunities, in terms of animals, things like that. So it's all part of.
Well, that's interesting, because that's what has been intriguing for me listening to you speak, is that there's multiple. I mean, it was also the resilience of the staff, resilience of the
that
then filtered. I mean, the animals are the most obvious part. Actually, it's about creating a resilience institution that then affects the resilience of the children. It's as you say, changing the whole mindset, everything from assemblies to the way staff are working to the way children have responsibilities and when they show up at school. That's interesting, that real ecological model. Can I talk a little bit about the designing of this whole thing, and how did you get to know that this particular community needed something different, or that this school community needed something different? How did you assess for that, or do a needs assessment? How did you and your staff arrive at that model that you've implemented?
It was it didn't need an assessment. It was you could walk into the building, and there wasn't broken's the wrong word, but certainly this um, how to phrase it? Just this lack of, kind of positivity. I think they've just been through such a rough ride. So you only had to walk in and understand that actually this was a school and a community that really needed lifting, bringing together, valuing in terms of who they were and what they brought to it, but also bringing back the pride in that in the community again and that sense of purpose. So it sounds probably not what you want to hear, but you could walk in and feel it. You could get a sense of it.
And you're saying that the school, you were identifying the school as a catalyst for the whole community change. That's
Absolutely.
That's an interesting because we'll talk about programs out there in the community as well. But in this case, it's a school being a catalyst for a change across the community.
The Ofsted described it as the central cog in the wheel of the community. Right. It's kind of one of those you're proud of above all else. Really, the school became village setting, but quite a big village on bordered by some very very deprived communities, estates, some of the most deprived in Europe. So the school drew from a really a diverse community. And a school going into special measures, actually the community,
Can I ask you about that? How did we sometimes think of schools as somewhat separate from the community. In initiating these new initiatives, how did you engage with other service providers, parents, even the children themselves in terms of developing this approach? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, there was some very definite the ways that we did that in terms of through a parent workshops, for example, through coffee mornings where we invited the whole community in, and they were faced throughout the year. That was an opportunity for me to set my stall out as principal and kind of get the troops on board, so to speak. But also just by living and breathing what we were talking about, by being on the gate at the end of the day, being on the gate at the start of the day, different gates, different access points, welcoming and engaging parents. Before, just as I was appointed, actually, so we're going back 3-4 years, but just as I was appointed, I had a whole weekend. I hired a machine, like a JCB type digger. And there was a field that was next to the school, 12-foot brambles all the way through it. And as part of, I was really clear we were going to have expedition week. So week 3 of my tenure, me setting my stall out, Paul Baker's here, this is what we're going to be doing, this is what we're about. So as part of expedition week, I spent 2 days cutting a maze into these brambles, huge maze in this field. It was good fun. I took my family down, but what I didn't realize was that watching from the road or watching from the gate, were people taking photographs or videos of the new principal sat on a digger, suddenly actually caring about the school. That then got posted online. This is our new principal, and it just started a bit of a bit more positivity. And this was in the summer before I started. And the end of the summer, jet washing the front steps, those sorts of things. So it was a whole raft of different approaches.
Changing not just a learning activity, you're talking about changing a culture of a school and the perception and indeed the position of the school in the community and the position of the people.
Yeah.
How did you, and did you set, when you were doing this, did you have a sense of outcomes? Are there outcomes that were in your logic model or your plan for this kind of new direction? Can you talk a little bit about how those were decided and indeed maybe even what they are?
The outcome, really the driver was a moral driver at the time. This is what I feel is right and this is what we're going to do. The outcomes, at the time as well, pupil numbers were falling rapidly. There were 108 when I actually arrived in school, down from 164. The competition around school places in the area, so quite significant in terms of funding and in terms of the longer term viability of the school. So one of the intended outcomes was actually to get the school into a very positive place, secure footing, and pupil numbers increasing. What I underestimated was how quickly they.
If you'd lost the numbers, then the school, which is a very community school, would
Yeah.
have disappeared, and of course, then the children would be going further, if I'm understanding, right, to other schools.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, I get that.
Yeah. So, the way funding works in the UK is actually per pupil funding. I'm sure it's the same elsewhere. So that would have a significant impact. There were four classes at the time, potentially dropping to 3 classes. So the school, it was quite significant. Around community as well, those the things like the projects I wanted to do, we've not got bundles of cash. There isn't nationally, globally anyway for schools. So we had to be very clever about how we used what we had. And, I was adamant that actually we were going to get these things done regardless. And the only way I could do it, that inviting community members in, grannies, aunties, uncles, parents, to actually support with the skill sets they had in terms of their, it might be through their businesses that they own, or they were carpenters, or grannies and granddads, aunties, uncles coming to hear readers in school. So we really embraced the community in support of the school, and in a really practical sense by giving them jobs, all safely, all correctly checked in terms of safeguarding, those sorts of things. The biggest where we started to see real impact was on what we called Big Dig Days. And they were a Saturday, and it would be me arriving 7:30 in the morning. Lots of posts on Facebook, newsletters, parent website, those sorts of things. And on the first Big Dig Day, we probably had maybe 25 families, something like that, all turning up with their children to literally get stuck in and get some of these jobs done. So we were painting walls, we were starting to dig the foundations of our polytunnel, get the chicken enclosure part sorted out, ready for the following year of chicken, those sorts of things. And that for me is one of the biggest successes around, just galvanizing a community around a focal point, i.e. the school, something that they can be really proud of again. But also that for me, in terms of the children, that what is key is that sense of belonging. And suddenly Dad was helping dig a hole or clean out a drain or dig a footing for a polytunnel. But Dad doesn't really get into school much. I'm stereotyping slightly because that is actually the nature. But and Dad's, parents just able to say, look, this is a great opportunity for me to work with my children in school. Those sorts of things were key.
What a neat message to say that your school is important enough for me to give up my time.
Yeah.
And therefore, then I can imagine it just starts a whole chain reaction.
And it does, and it's all, everything we do, everything I do, it's all about relationship. And the stronger the relationships I have with pupils, with my principals now, or with my staff, are key. And what an unintended consequence of this, if you like, although probably deep down we knew what we're doing, is actually building relationships with parents, some of our hard to reach parents, in a very unconfrontational setting, with a positive footing. So when things did get more challenging after, or there was an incident or something, actually we were able to deal with it in a much in a really clear way, because we already had those relationships with the parents.
You're describing a community that is somewhat vulnerable, marginalized as well. I'm curious about how does your efforts at the school also influence, say, connections with other programs that children might need who fit that profile? Like, has it just been the school and the parents, or does it even go further afield to other?
Yeah, absolutely. We're in terms of our local networks, 2-3 years down the line, what we've become Global School has become a real hub in terms of outdoor learning, or learning outdoors is probably the better way to phrase that. So lots of schools coming to visit, show around so how are you using the polytunnel, your rabbits, your goats, your fire pit. So it's become a real local hub of in terms of best practice around that model. But also we've got I don't know whether you're familiar, but the Thrive approach, which is an emotional health and well-being program for children about the emotional and mental health of
All
pupils.
that done internally, or are you connected to the other mental health supports in the community as well?
Yeah, connected. So through a Head Start program, which is funded by the big lottery in the UK. There's £10 million for Cornwall. So we've been working with Head Start to get their Thrive practitioners actually, but it's 10 days training. So you can support at the point of need and provide training for staff, and an analysis tool from a pupil's perspective about where they sit emotionally. So that's been key as well. So all these things sit alongside. So part of a consequence or an outcome from a Thrive, what we call a Thrive assessment, which is an assessment of that emotional health, mental health, is that an action plan gets produced for those children. And part of that action plan could be that they're walking Whoopi at lunch times, at break times, reading to the dog, cleaning the goats out, all about relationships. So it starts to all fit together because those opportunities and that breadth of curriculum is there, and it sits within our trust, our school.
I love it. That's fascinating to see those connections, plus the sense of, well, you're looking at, psychosocial, emotional learning, community, the parents, changing the culture of families around education, promoting sort of a community coming together. This is interesting. All from what looks pretty simple, but actually has ripple effects out. Paul, let me thank you again for sharing some of these design principles and your how you're actually creating that resilience with your particular population in your school. Thanks again for taking the time, and all the best to you and your students.
Thank you, Michael. Nice talking to you. All the best.